the land on which we meet and pay tribute to their history, their culture and their ongoing struggles for justice for the many crimes committed against the traditional people of our nation. We're here today and I very warmly congratulate the organisers of Peace and Justice for Kashmir. We're united together today, and that is a movement that is growing around the world, and we must ensure that our voice continues to be strong and to be raised consistently. This issue of the violence that's been perpetrated in Kashmir appears to be dropping out of the headlines today, but that doesn't mean that we can drop our commitment to peace and justice for the people of Kashmir. I certainly express, and I believe that I'm doing that on behalf of everybody. There's been so many people killed in this region, but let's just remember that in the past month it has been exceptional, with Kashmiri villagers, people in Pakistan, people in India, and then also the military people, about 40 of them, all dying unnecessarily. And this is what we are now working so hard to ensure that that stops. As I mentioned, this has been in the world headlines. And understandably, people have been very troubled. To have two nuclear powers engaged in military actions, two nuclear powers engaged in military actions against each other deeply troubles people. It's never happened before where you've had military nuclear powers fighting like that. And so it did give the world's attention. But now we have to build on that. Now, as an Australian resident, it's something that I feel very strongly about, in terms of we have a responsibility to ensure that we give every attention to this, and there is a key role and much that Australia can do. But before I go into what Australia can do now, I think it's worth remembering that Australia has played a very significant historical role with Kashmir. That Australia was involved right from the early days. From 1950 to 1966, Australia held the position of the chief military observer in the region for Kashmir. And also we had eight military observer positions on the United Nations Military Observers Group for Pakistan and India. All very significant going into the 1980s to show a very close relationship. And most significantly, Sir Owen Dixon was selected. He's an Australian, a former Chief Justice. He was selected by the United Nations Security Council to actually organise the plebiscite. So Kashmiris had the choice, could make the decision on their future. Now we know that plebiscite never went ahead, and I'm not blaming Sir Owen Dixon, but it's a reminder. I wanted to just put the context there that Australia has a long history here, and it's a history of working to assist Kashmiris that we need to revive. And how can we do that? Australia is a member of the Human Rights Council at the present time, and this is the body that can provide a pathway to peace and justice for Kashmiris. And why I say that so emphatically is because last year the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner brought down a most significant report about this region. A report with very clear recommendations that now we need to act on, and all the more important now because of what has happened in the past month. Now let's remind ourselves, and I know I've spoken to some of you in the past about this, but it's worth reiterating, because it does show where we do have a problem with how the countries are responding to it. To their credit, the Pakistan government, and I've heard the Foreign Minister speak about this both in Pakistan and at the recent conference on Kashmir in London, where he has committed many times to not only supporting those recommendations, but allowing an international independent investigation to be conducted by the Human Rights Council to come into Pakistan and to have free access anywhere. So that's very important, that very deep and ongoing commitment has been given by Pakistan. However, unfortunately, the Indian government has rejected the report outright. They've actually ridiculed the report. They've said that it's unnecessary. They've implied that it was contradictory and that it was just something that should not have occurred at all, and are not accepting any of the recommendations. And this is where Australia needs to take this issue up, both in the Human Rights Council, where we are a member, working with other members of the Council to get this issue on the agenda, to work with India to bring them on board. But also Australia, and I acknowledge that India is this huge trading partner, and often countries like Australia back off in those circumstances and they just want to think about trade. But we can't consider trade without considering human rights. We can't separate those. And that's where we're at the moment, that we need to put, as Australians and people living in Australia, to put pressure on our government to play a key role here, to acknowledge that we've got a history, it's not as though we're coming from nowhere, and to really get on with it. So that really is where we need to take this issue, because as I've mentioned a few times, I am worried that the issue of Kashmir is now going to fall out of the headlines. I'm very much involved in the Palestine issue, but Palestine we hear about regularly. It's not being resolved, but at least it's in the world headlines, and there is a huge global movement. And that's what we need to ensure that we have for the peace and justice movement for Kashmir. We need to keep it in the world headlines, build support around the world, and that support is there. Like I was just in London at a most impressive conference. There was a conference about Kashmir, a reception, an exhibition, and also the British government has a parliamentary group called the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Kashmir. They just had a delegation last year they had a delegation to Kashmir, and their report is most significant. Not only does it back up the human rights report that I've just spoken about, but they also have come out and calling on the Indian government to drop those laws where that the Indian government uses to penalise marginal people. Now that's very significant, because all parties in both houses of the British Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, put their name to this report. So that's where we can take encouragement. These movements of support for justice and peace in Kashmir are really gathering strength around the world. Here today, we need to remember we're part of that movement. And I think it's vital that we take away a commitment in our hearts to continue to raise our voice. We will encourage people, members of Parliament, to do it in Parliament. We need to do it on the streets. We need to do it through our many organisations. So the movement for peace and justice for Kashmir grows stronger and it delivers, so it becomes a reality that when we say the words peace and justice for Kashmir, that's how the Kashmiris are living. Thank you very much.